This is The Audience Connection, the podcast where we go into what content actually connects and into why it sticks.
Sponsored by Casual, where behavioral science meets storytelling to build trust for your audiences.
We're your hosts. I'm Ollie Atkinson.
And I'm Lydia Chan. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today's episode is going to challenge one of the most overused words in modern leadership. That word is authentic. I mean, not just in leadership, really. I think authenticity has been overused in general, especially in our world, in filmmaking as well.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have you heard that in a brief that you want it to be authentic or the footage needs to be authentic? And it's just used so much now. And this episode is a proper reframe. Our guest is Jenni Field. She's the founder of Redefining Communications. So she has spent years inside organizations as a comms director and global head of comms. So she really knows her onions. And then she went off and became an independent. And now most of her work goes into fixing broken organizations, broken leadership, credibility.
So important right now, right? Especially, with the kind of declining trust, I think that a lot of folks have with their leadership within organizations, governments, what have you. Her overarching argument is, is that we've all been told for years to be more authentic at work, bring your whole self, lean in, all of that. But Jenni says authenticity is actually one of the more dangerous words in leadership right now because it can be so easily weaponized. She says the word we should be using is genuine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the nice examples she gives is when a leader turns up in a room and screams at everyone and then says, "Well, I'm just being my authentic self." But so what she's done is she's come up with this great framework she's built called the credibility wheel. And it's got 8 practices that make a leader credible. So she walks us through that one, and almost every leader is currently failing on one or more of these, and there's one that everyone is failing on, and it's probably not the one that you guessed.
Well, I wonder which one I'm failing on, but maybe I'll discover that later. I think it's great because you guys also get into why leaders need to be more visible is actually meaningless advice, why over communicating when trust is low makes things even worse. Right. And then a really practical take on AI in leadership comms.
Yeah. So if you've ever sat through a town hall and wondered why the room feels so flat, well, this one might sting a little in a good way.
All right. Here's Ollie's conversation with Jenni Field.
Hello and welcome back to The Audience Connection. Now, today's episode starts with a slightly uncomfortable truth, and that inside a lot of organizations, people simply don't believe their leaders. And today I'm joined by Jenni Field, who is a speaker, consultant, podcaster, author of a few books, one of which we're going to talk about today, which is called Nobody Believes You. And Jenni has spent years helping organizations understand a gap between what leaders say and what people actually trust. Jenni, welcome to the show. It's brilliant to have you on.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. And I have to say, I can see the book behind you there, but if anyone's like not watching this and listening on audio, the book is pretty hard to ignore. It's a bright blue cover, huge yellow letters. And I was on the train reading this and I actually felt self-conscious. I was publicly questioning my own integrity by just holding this book. Now that probably tells you something about me, but I think it also touches on how confronting this topic is, right? Like, yeah, it touches a nerve, doesn't it? Especially with leaders who think they're behaving in the right way and it's all been driven. And you talk about like examples of someone that still couldn't get there. Yeah. But before we get into the work, what was there a moment, because you worked in internal comms before you went into this consulting path, right? So you really lived it first. Was there a moment where you realized, hang on a minute, people aren't believing what's being communicated? Was there a specific time that happened?
I think there was a combination of things. I published my first book, which was Influential Internal Communication, in 2021. So I finished that during the pandemic, which was a really interesting time for leadership, internal comms, workplace culture. And so as I was publishing that, which was all about sort of the tactics and strategies to employ to make your organization more efficient, more engaging, the thing that became quite apparent during the pandemic was really all routes lead to leadership. If you want to improve your organizational culture, your communication, all of those things. And when it comes down to that, what it comes down to is not leaders being authentic or things like that. It's about that credibility and that belief and that want to follow someone and believing them enough to follow them. That's the action that we want. So I think it was a bit of the pandemic played a role for me in terms of almost that light bulb moment of, it's not these big words that we talk about all the time of vulnerability, empathy, authentic, all this stuff. It's bigger than that. It's that outcome of following and belief and ultimately trust, I guess.
Of course, the pandemic it just threw everyone into turmoil, didn't it? And all of a sudden you're completely separated from your workforce a lot of the time. And that really sharpens the focus on what the team think of you as a leader, right? And that sort of really, I guess, helped your work. But it's very, very different. And I think it also showed people up in really different ways, because suddenly you were at home in a very different environment to when you're in the office as a leader. And my history working as a comms director, global head of comms, my CEO and leadership team were in suits every day. And that was very much the uniform of the office. It was very formal, very corporate. And then you switch to the pandemic and suddenly you're talking to people in your living room as a leader. And it's just, it just changed so many relationships and how we communicate and everything, I think, about the world of work. And I think we're still seeing that impact even today. Yeah. And in a way, I think I know it put this distance between everyone, but the working from home environment that suddenly everybody saw, people are in their pants with their toddlers hanging around their necks, sort of like that produced this authenticity that we talk. I mean, I'd love to talk about this whole, because it's bandied around in the video industry so much, like authentic content. But I think that helped in a way. You started to see the real people behind the suits, right?
Yes. Yeah. I was just about to say it became real. And there was an article I read a while ago about the fact that you can't create authentic content because it's always staged when you're doing stuff. Yeah. For anything that's published, there's always an element of staging to it in terms of maybe scripting or lighting or all those different things that kind of come in. But that just became very real. And I think that showed up real traits, real personalities, enabled real connection, all those things. It's hard to hide from as well, because it was a crisis situation. So there's really different emotions in situations like that. It's not comparable to just now working from home, because it was just such a different time.
And now we've obviously moved on several years now. So how widespread is this issue now that you're seeing in this sort of trust gap? Is that still there, very much alive and well, or have you seen the juice?
No, we're fine now. We've totally solved this.
Yeah.
So everyone's having a dreamy time at work. I think it's probably the worst it's ever been. And there's some data to back that up. So I was reading something the other day around, according to Gallup, who's obviously a big source of research, they said that only 21% of US employees strongly agree that they trust their organization's leadership. That's been going downhill since 2019. But more recently, the Edelman Trust Barometer reported an unprecedented global decline in employee trust, which is the first such drop in the study's 26-year history.
Wow.
So I think when you start to look at the data, it supports what people are feeling. And certainly in the world of communications, HR, workplace culture, leadership, all that world I'm sort of playing in, it's an issue everywhere. Employees don't trust us from the leadership, from employees. We don't trust the leaders. Like the gap is real. And there is a desire, I think, to change that. But I don't know that there's always the desire to take the action that's needed to change that. And I think that's why the gap's getting bigger. I think we're aware of it. I think we want to solve it. But actually, to your point at the beginning of this about the uncomfortable nature of reading a book called Nobody Believes You, the work has to be on yourself. And that's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to stand there and say, I don't think I have, very much integrity. No one's going to have that conversation, unless someone makes them have that conversation. And I think that's what stops us from closing the gap.
Completely. And I don't want to take this to a kind of geopolitical, but when you go leadership, you're going right to the top, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And when there's a lack of trust right from the top, you're then kind of like sowing this goes right the way through culture as well. But okay, let's not go there right now. But like if what happens inside an organization when this trust starts to erode? Do you start to see, where does it start to show up first? Is it in culture, or do you start to see performance dropping? Where, what would you kind of keep an eye out for when trust starts to disappear?
So when we're looking, so trust is messy. And I think that's probably the first thing to say. It involves people. Organizations are people, and they need relationships and social connection. And we have to have trust as human beings. So that's why it's messy. You know, we can't survive when we're born without another human being looking after us. So trust is inherent in us for our survival, which makes it a very big, raw, passionate topic for us to talk about. When it goes wrong in organizations, the biggest metric people will see, which is the most metric people use, is their employee engagement surveys. So if you've got low engagement scores, you have a trust issue. So that is the link between the two. So that disengagement is distrust. That's what's going to happen. The bit that's kind of missing from that conversation is integrity. So if you as a leader lack integrity, you will get distrust. But if you are not trustworthy, you'll get disengagement. So there's a link there that's just worth exploring a little bit in terms of, is it about being trustworthy, about being open and honest and transparent, or is it about my integrity in terms of doing what I say I'm going to do and keeping my word? They are similar, but they have sort of nuanced differences in terms of your behavior and relationships, and they have an impact on employees every day in the tiny moments, not just the big stuff. But that's what you'll see. You'll see your engagement scores getting lower. You might see people leaving. You know, that can happen. You know, you can get, you know, rejection through elements of credibility, but people will often want to stay to make it better. So sometimes when we have low engagement, it doesn't mean that people want to run out the door. Sometimes they really care and they want to make it better, and they've got this hope, and they're disengaged because they care. So it's not always seen in the retention numbers. It's more seen in maybe a bit of apathy, not doing what you want them to do, and just sort of disengaging with the work. And then you're just sort of trudging along as an organization with people feeling quite discontent in terms of their work.
Yeah, I've got to say, like, you know, having had those one-to-one conversations and spending that time with somebody and saying, you know, what's going on with you at the moment, you know, and that passion suddenly comes out, right? Like, and they're like, this could be brilliant. We could do this and we could do that. And all of a sudden that appears where you think, oh, that person's tuned out and they're going to leave next week.
Yes.
But actually they really, really care. So
Yeah, they just want to be listened to. And I think so much of leadership is making time for people. And I think that's the easiest thing you can do. You know, if you've got that issue, like you said, just having that conversation and saying, well, you know, what about this? Or how do you feel about that? People can come to life. You know, some people won't. Some people will be like, I hate it. You know, I'm not interested.
I hate it and I hate you.
And I'm off, right? And that is, and we have to also understand that. Like, it's a relationship at the end of the day. You have to all choose to be in it, and it is a choice. So you can only create the trust if everybody wants that relationship to work. So you've got that to sort of contend with as well. But I think that positivity, that desire for things to be not necessarily how they were, you know, it's not about harking back to that, but it's seeing those opportunities of what could be different and better. And if people just listen to me and, you know, I was trusted to do the stuff I know that would make a difference, you know, the trust is so two-way. You know, you have to extend it as a leader and to get it back. And that's what I mean by it's just, there's a lot of layers to it. It's very messy.
Yeah. And I think, you know, like you say, like, it's like a relationship, isn't it? Like any sort of like, you need both sides to be putting the effort in. Otherwise one's going to become disengaged. And I think that's really important. But I think one thing I've noticed in some organizations, you start to kind of, when there's a sort of default to communication, when there's a lack of trust appearing, they roll out the comms, right? And it's like, let's go for it. Let's really communicate heavily. Why does that happen? Why is there over communication when trust is low? I mean, there is an idea that you can't really over communicate.
Yes.
But when trust is low, it doesn't really work. Yes. Right? Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So you're just, I want to say throwing money at the problem, but you're not, you're throwing volume at the problem, right? That's not going to actually help us, because you're not dealing with the root cause of the issue. It's an easy plaster, right? You've seen the symptom. Oh, people aren't trusting us. Let's communicate more. And sometimes that comes because part of the feedback people are hearing is, leaders need to be more visible. Right? I hear this all the time at the moment. Leaders need to be more visible. I don't know what that means. Like, like what, in what way? As in the office, or we need to do more town halls, or we need to have more video content so you can see us? Like, what does that mean? And I think that doesn't help. So when you start to throw just volume at the problem, you're not dealing with the root cause. If you're hearing people don't trust leaders, then you have an integrity problem. And that's behavioral. That's the fact that you're not keeping your word. You're not showing up. You're not doing the stuff that people are expecting you to do. And that's work on you as an individual to do and address that. Communication isn't going to fix that problem. In fact, if anything, it's probably going to make it worse, because people are going to feel like they're drowning in noise. It's not relevant.
Yeah,
and you're trying to hide something by sending all this stuff out. Like, what are we going to miss? You know, there's a lot of, if you're dealing with that skepticism, you've got to tread really carefully and strategically.
Yeah, all of a sudden people feel don't listen to at all, and feel ramping up the comms, and they're like, right, well, that's not what the issue is.
Yes.
You feel like you're not listening in the slightest. Yeah. And I wonder, going back to something you just said a minute ago around kind of, you know, these surveys, do you think we're measuring it in the wrong way? You know, are we trying to understand how happy everyone is or how engaged they are?
Yes.
Because surveys have been proven to be quite bad at kind of understanding what people feel or what people are, you know, they're doing. Is there a different way to do this?
So I don't know. So there is a different way to do it. And I think to your point in that question of what is it we're really trying to measure? So I went down a bit of a rabbit hole recently of engagement and what does it really mean? And if that word didn't exist, what would we call it? And what do we really want to measure in organizations? Because it's not happiness. We're responsible for our own happiness. Work, you know, can contribute to that, but we control our emotions. So it's not that. What do we really mean by engagement? Because that has shifted in the pandemic in terms of what we're expecting that to look like. Because some people will say, oh, it's going the extra mile. It's, you know, working, you know, to the death to get stuff. People aren't doing that anymore. And why is that? Why is that engagement? So I could do a whole podcast on that, I think, but it's that as a premise, I think, is part of our problem. In terms of measuring it, the work that we do, I'm always having one-to-one conversations with people for 60 or 90 minutes, or maybe doing focus groups, but getting that rich data and insight and conversation to find out what's going on. If you don't do that, then you're just looking at stats and ticking boxes and stuff like that. If you do a survey, you're always going to have to do focus groups or one-to-one conversations afterwards. So I'm always like, do you need to do the survey? Could you just jump straight to the people stuff and the rich bit to get the information that you need? Because you'll be able to dig in and get to that root cause of what's really going on much quicker.
That the idea of digging in, I think, is the really important part, isn't it? And that, you know, talking to a lot of these behavior scientists on the show, it's this laddering idea. It's like you get your surface answer and then you need to keep pushing and going, okay, why is that? And why? You essentially keep asking why to get to what the root cause is, what actually people feel. So yeah, I can see that working a bit better in that way. So let's talk a little bit about credibility. So if it's about being credible, and I love the kind of the credibility wheel that you've created in Nobody Believes You. Let's go through some of those. What are the behaviors that actually make a leader credible, and how do we improve them? Because I think there's something around time, and everyone feels very time poor, more time poor than they used to. And I remember someone saying to me, like, as a managing director, your job is to just get new business through the door. That's it. Just like the most important thing is sales and get the jobs through the door. And that is a really important part, obviously, of the role.
Yeah.
But it really, that focus really helps you lose sight of everything else. And if you are not kind of nurturing the team behind all of that work that you're getting through the door, you're losing those clients, right? So I think credibility is really important, but I think everyone feels very time poor at the moment.
Yes.
And how do we work on these points while trying to keep everything else in the air? Yeah.
And, you know, when I did the research behind the book to find out first from sort of followers, like, why do you follow some leaders and not others? And then I was asking leaders similar questions about what do you think makes you credible and what stops you? And time was like the number one thing that everyone came back with. I just don't have time.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is also a bit of a hangover from the pandemic, where work has become just so task focused and less about the relationships. You know, there's so much talk now about, you know, meetings aren't work. I think I saw as a headline the other day, which gave me such rage. I wrote a LinkedIn article about it because they're important, you know, all those things. But your point about, you know, what is it that makes us credible? And when I was looking at this, it was trying to get behind some of those big words. So there's 8 practices in the credibility wheel, which are being capable, having empathy, showing integrity, being likable, being supportive, being trustworthy, having a visionary practice, which is about communication, inspiring, passion, and being vulnerable. And those are the 8 practices that you need to demonstrate. The thing about credibility is it's not about the fact that you don't have these, it's that you're not demonstrating them. So I'm not saying you don't have integrity. I mean, you might not, right? But I'm saying people aren't seeing that behavior from you. So if we look at integrity, that's about keeping your word, being accountable, being genuine. If I don't see that from you, if I feel like you're always not keeping your word, you're always cancelling that one-to-one, you're always saying you're going to do something and then it doesn't quite come through, and then you're not owning up to that or whatever it might be, that is not showing integrity. You might have some integrity, but you're not showing it. And it's the same with all of them. It's you might be capable, but you're not demonstrating your knowledge or you're not taking action that people can see. And that's why it's not about time that's the blocker. It's about being intentional with your time. So if you're going into a meeting, it's maybe doing a bit of planning or prepping or making sure you're thinking about how am I going to answer this? Who's in the room? How do I need to show up? It's that intentionality around what you're doing to demonstrate some of these 8. And you'll need different bits at different times, right? Sometimes you've got to really dial up empathy, being supportive. If you're going through lots of change in organizations, supportive and empathy are going to be really important. But you might need to sort of not dial down, but you might not need to show quite so much of the integrity and likability and trustworthiness because you don't need that so much. So
Right.
You've got different bits at different times, different cultures, different things as well. So I don't want anyone to feel like, oh my God, I've got to work on all 8 all at once and be amazing. Like, how am I going to do this? Because you can't. You're a human being.
Yeah, it's quite overwhelming to try and think of dialing up all 8 at the same
Yes.
time. But is there one specifically that's like leaders constantly get wrong? Is there one that is the standout one?
Yeah,
You really do need to work on that, all of you.
this is the one. So whenever I work with a team, I get them to do a credibility gap assessment so I can see which one they need to work on first. And I would say at the moment, being supportive is the one that's coming up the most. And I do think that's linked to change because I think people are going through so much change and transformation in organizations, naturally focused on the task of that change and possibly moving faster than other people in the organization are comfortable with. And therefore people don't feel that supported, doesn't maybe feel as safe, maybe doesn't feel as inclusive. I don't feel like the leader's doing this for me. It feels like I'm just being dragged along and no one's listening to me or making time. And so that's the one that's coming out. Things like integrity nearly always come up because it's the one we all think we have, but it's actually the hardest one to get right because we all want to keep our word. We all want to stay true to those things, but it's very easy for that to slip because other priorities come in, things happen, life, so that one is tricky. But supportive, I would say, is the one that I see coming up the most at the moment for leaders.
Okay. And why then, like, if this all builds trust seems to be quite fragile, doesn't it? Like once you've got it, it's almost like a shortcut and you build loyalty that way once you've got it.
Yes.
But it can break really quickly, right? Why does it break so fast? I mean, I kind of think I know the answer to this, but why is it so fragile, essentially?
Yeah. So I think that there is that old phrase about, it takes ages to build trust, then you can break it in a moment. And I don't always agree with that because I think you can break trust in a moment, but if you do that, that's linked very much to the values of the individuals and the relationship that you've got. So you might do something, we might have a really great relationship and then you might do something and I'm like, oh my God, now I don't trust him because you've done something that doesn't align to my values. That's a very personal thing for that big break. What we see in organizations more is a sort of drip feeding of that. So they weren't quite as transparent as I thought they were going to be about the numbers, or we didn't hear about that and they said last time we would. And, I've just heard this rumor, or, there's different messages going to different places. All those sorts of things gradually chip away at trust. And the minute you start to put that sort of fear in people or that worry or that state of threat, then that's the bit where you've sort of broken it. The minute I'm sort of second guessing you, the trust is starting to go. And unless you catch that, quickly, you could really tip into that place of distrust.
Yeah. And it is quite hard balance to strike, isn't it? Like, you know, when you talk about like financial transparency, for one,
Yes.
you want to keep people in the loop and say, this is what's happening and this is what's next. But you also don't want anyone to worry. You know, there might be a decision that you take as a leadership team and it's going to take the organization in this direction. Well, that could be quite worrying, and change can be quite worrying for people. So that's a really hard balance to strike.
Yes.
Have you got any tips on how you can kind of make sure that you're not, you know, sort of not worrying people by over communicating sort of sensitive words?
Yeah, I think the context is important. So,
Okay.
and the story is important. So my belief is that nothing should ever be a surprise, right? So if the organization is suddenly having to make redundancies because of decisions that have been made, that shouldn't be a surprise, because the strategic narrative or the story that's been shared continuously throughout the organization about decisions made, we're trying this, we're doing that, this is happening, you know, we've tried this, let's give you some feedback on how that went, now we're doing this. You know, all of that storytelling leads to people going on that journey with you. If you don't do that and you keep everything, you know, behind closed doors, and then you go, oh crap, now we've got to make some redundancies, that's when people are like, what? Like that's horrible, right? That's almost the worst thing you can do. So I think you've got to communicate consistently. You know, we've talked about kind of flooding the audience when you're worried about it. There's got to be that consistency. It's got to feel stable. I've got to know when things are coming. It's got to be open space for me to ask questions, discuss all that stuff. And that helps. You know, that's all you need to do. If someone's asking you something and you feel like, I can't talk about that because that's really commercially sensitive, or I feel like if I share that is going to cause some panic, then it's absolutely fine to say, I'm not in a position to share that because it's just too sensitive for the organization. But when I am, when we've got more information, or when I can share that with a bit more context, then I will. I think we worry a lot about not saying stuff and feeling like we have to say everything, but you can't control how everyone's going to feel. And I think sometimes we hold that as leaders, feeling like, I don't want to upset anybody, or I don't want to worry anyone. And you can't control that. There's going to be decisions you're going to have to make where people will be worried and they will be upset and they will be angry. And that's okay. You know, you can't operate as a leader if you're focusing on that sort of being liked element, which is ultimately what that is. That's why I've got likable in the wheel. You want to be likable, but you don't need to be liked. And if you're focusing in on that, you're never going to make the right decisions for the organization.
Goes back to this idea in your book about leaders underestimate the weight of their behavior, and so you need to be able to kind of be mindful of what that means to people. If you're saying something, there's probably quite a lot hanging on that. I think you phrased it as like, here comes the king, or something, when the leaders came. The royal visit.
That was it. The royal visit.
Yeah. And so, like, I think that's really important to be aware of, because you know, from the transition that you talk about as well, from, you know, one of the gang basically to actually saying, this is what we're going to be doing, there's more weight hanging on your words.
Yeah. And I don't think we talk enough about that. I feel like it's a bit of a thread through the book about that power dynamic and that relationship between leaders and the people they lead. There is that power dynamic. And there's been a narrative for a number of years about, you know, we don't need middle managers. We don't want a hierarchy. We just want everyone to have a lovely time, right? That doesn't work. Humans don't work like that. The minute you get to more than 150 people, you need some sort of structure. But, you know, we have to remember that, you know, you're in a position of power. You can fire me. You can sack me. You can dismiss me. You can put me on, but you can do it. You know, you can. That's the reality. And I think trying to pretend that's not there doesn't help anybody in terms of building really genuine relationships.
Yeah. And I think that's the case in actually smaller businesses, I would say, as well, under 150. Like it's really nice to have a flattish structure, but there still is a natural hierarchy in place of experience as well. And, you know, you've done this for a much longer time than someone who's just coming into the business. Yeah. And that needs to be recognized, and you need to kind of take responsibility for that as well. Yeah. But you just mentioned genuine, and that's where I want to go on to this idea of authentic, not authentic, but genuine, because what's the difference between the two?
Well, there is a difference.
Yeah, come on. Authentic. Everyone's banging on about authenticity all the time and vulnerability. Yeah. But why do you say that's not helpful?
So I don't want people to be authentic. And whenever I start this in a sort of talk or a workshop or something, people get quite angry at times because they've been told for years, be more authentic, bring your whole self to work, do all this stuff. That's fine if you're not in a position of power, you know, arguably you could argue that. But it's not fine if you're going to kind of weaponize it. And authenticity can be so easily weaponized. So I have worked with leaders and individuals who have shouted at others, sworn at others, done all sorts of stuff. And then they say like, oh, I'm just being, you know, just being my authentic self, right? That's not okay. So that's why I don't want us to focus on being authentic, because when you're in a leadership position and you're in that position of power, you don't have the luxury of that. To your earlier point of the weight of your words and how much, you know, you're a royal visit, you know, you've got that status. So authenticity doesn't work. So that's where I started to look at what do we want? It's credibility, what makes up credibility. But I use genuine in the book when I'm talking about having integrity rather than authenticity, because being genuine means that you're sort of being actually and exactly what is claimed. So being authentic is something that's kind of known to be true. So it was often linked to things like documents or stuff like that, but it's known to be true and reliable and trustworthy. Whereas genuine is real. You know, it's not fake or artificial. It's honest and it's sincere. And if we think about people, we think about integrity, think about that. We want someone to be genuine. I would never, can you imagine if somebody shouted at you and then they went, I was just being really genuine. Like it just wouldn't happen because it doesn't feel the same. And I think I haven't looked at the etymology of the words, but I feel like authentic is more about sort of documentations and authenticating things. And it's become moved into a word to talk about people, whereas actually people are genuine. You know, a document is authentic. Like that's a very different thing. And I think that's where I started to look at it here in that sort of realm of weaponization, really. You just can't do it with genuine, where you can with authentic.
Have you seen this? I mean, I don't want to call out any brands or anything, but have you seen this done really, really well? Have you got experiences where you've seen leaders living these sort of these 8 principles really well in a large organization, and what do they do differently day to day?
So it's interesting. When I did my first talk, when the book came out, somebody said to me, who would be the person you would say is, you know, credible? Who should we be looking to? And I really struggled to come up with that. And actually we ended up down a sort of celebrity avenue of like David Attenborough of like, that's a credible person, because pretty much everyone knows who he is. If I think about my career, I've worked with lots of different leaders in my career, different CEOs of different sized organizations. I have definitely worked with CEOs who are credible, and they have done all of these things. But the thing they did the most is the visionary practice. So they were able to communicate well, they were able to show their passion, and they were able to inspire people to do stuff. I think when you've got that, sort of almost the rest of the wheel can sometimes fall into place. Right. And if I'm thinking about the leaders that I followed and that I saw other people following, you know, people that worked in stores in different places that were like, have you seen this message on the internet? And that's when you know you're getting something right, when people are talking about stuff and they're feeling engaged and inspired. That's when it works. So I have seen it. But I will say the majority of my work now as a consultant is to go in and fix it. So I don't see it so much now, because a lot of my work is helping leaders improve it.
Yeah, and I liked also where you touched on the idea that it's not necessarily extroverted or introverted. Like if you're introverted, you can still show up with these, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't communicate, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a real misguided view. And I do talk about it in the book about people like Barack Obama, Lady Gaga, these people who are introverts, but, you know, have become very well known for their ability to communicate and be followed and be leaders in their worlds. And I think that's important. I think quite often I hear people, not always leaders, maybe sort of middle managers being told, you know, you've got to speak up more and you've got to do this. That's not always true. You know, actually, there's nothing in this wheel that talks about speaking up more and being louder and having an opinion very quickly. And I mean, it's not about that, because you can be introverted and quiet and all of these things, and people will follow you and you will lead, and that will be amazing. But if you don't have all of these, that's going to be harder if you are introverted or quieter. And I think that's probably the balance to consider.
Yeah. And I think, obviously at Casual, we produce video that helps build
Hmm.
trust in these large organizations. How can video help in this? Is this a tool? Does it reflect the credibility of the leaders? When you're doing leadership comms, the more creative it is, you said at the start, I think that's an interesting thing we could dig into is like, if something is staged or
Yeah.
performative, is it not genuine, or what's the best way of
Yes.
using
Yeah.
video to do this?
So I think video has a really good place in organizations. And I think when we're looking at building trust, the best way to build trust is to be together in person. Like that's the best way to do it. Second best is going to be video, because I can see more of you. I can see your body language. I can see your face. I can see so much more. So it makes the conversation much richer. In terms of sort of the pre-recorded video and those things, that always has to be right for your culture. And I think you learn as a communication professional or an HR professional, do we need to do a really corporate polished video here? Or do we just need someone walking down the street on a phone and there's an edit? What's the right sort of, I'm going to use the word vibe, which I don't think I'd be, but what's the right vibe that we want for this film, for the outcome we're looking for? All of those things have to be considered. I think if you're just doing it because you feel like, oh, the leaders need to be more visible, which we talked about, let's do some more video. Like that's just not going to work, because it's not linked to any particular outcome. But if you're looking to build trust, you're a global organization, or you're a large organization spread out, or people are, deskless workers and they're out and about, then using video as a way to communicate with them, either doing live chats or recorded stuff and films, that's going to help. But it's got to be genuine. If that leader is not someone who wants to be on film and they're really uncomfortable and that's not their world, then it's going to take some time to build that with them as a skill, or find a different route for them. I always say, just don't force people into stuff that's going to do their credibility damage, because that's easy to do.
That makes sense. Yeah. Like I think you need, and quite often we found that, you find someone that you think is, or the organization think is going to be brilliant on camera because they're quite gregarious and they're out there. And then once they're on camera, they really kind of go into themselves. And vice versa. You might have someone who's quite shy, but they can really come to life on screen and talk articulately and really connect. So it's, I guess, it's our job to find those people and make that work. But I think where we've seen organizations really use video effectively is, say in pharma, having a really good, vulnerable conversation with a patient, or doing a similar thing, like internally, like understanding what's the creative, the vibe that fits for that culture is key, really.
Yes.
And I think but there's this risk associated with it. And I think brands are sometimes, or internal comms especially, they throw the idea of video out there, and then you end up with a ton of assets that are doing more damage than good.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right. Like we need to go back to what's going to come to life in that organization and then build the creative off the back of that.
Yes. Yeah. It's got to always come back to, what is it we're really trying to achieve? I think I say the phrase, to what end, every day.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with it? What are we trying to achieve? What's the outcome? How do you want people to feel? All of that stuff. I think if you don't have those conversations, you don't know that the activities you're taking are going to have that impact. And I think for internal comms at the moment, it's very easy to get stuck in churning out content and just being stuck in this really reactive mode of just getting stuff out the door, because there's just so much going on that time to stop, think, figure that out and have that strategic conversation just isn't always there.
Yeah. And no, again, from the work we've been doing on the neuroscience and this, is like, if you actually take a step back and understand what's going to resonate with people and produce that work, you can actually produce less content.
Yes.
And it feels weird. We say that now as a production company. We're like, produce less. We shouldn't be saying that. But if you produce less content, more resonant content, you're going to then start to actually connect with people and you'll see change off the back of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Right. Where is AI going to fit into all of this? Is that a barrier for communicating effectively, being credible? All of a sudden there's a robot in between everybody.
Yeah.
What's that doing to trust and credibility?
So it's interesting, because I was talking about this earlier on today over on Reddit. Actually, there was a bit of a discussion going on about communicating and AI and all that sort of stuff. And I went back to a very early episode of my podcast Frequency, which I host with a guy called Chuck in the US. And we talk about different articles that have been published. And episode 3, which is nearly a year ago now, we talked about an article that was in the Harvard Business Review. which was entitled "Why CEOs Should Think Twice Before Using AI to Write Messages." So I grabbed it for this conversation because I thought it was helpful.
Okay, brilliant.
And it's basically, they ran this test called the Wade test, and they had a CEO answer a whole load of employee submitted questions, and then had an AI trained on that CEO's past comms answer the exact same questions. So then employees were showing the responses and asked to guess, was this human or AI? So was it the CEO or was it, a robot? And employees only guessed correctly 59% of the time. But if they thought the message came from AI, they rated it as less helpful, even if it was actually written by the CEO. Right. So that's interesting from a trust perspective, because if the belief is there that it's being written by AI, then you're breaking down that helpful trust. You're breaking down that relationship, because people will start to think, well, I'm not sure that is, so I'm just not going to read that as much. There was also a more recent article published talking about AIDR. So rather than TLDR, which was too long, didn't read, now we've got AIDR, which is, if you can't be bothered to write it, I'm not going to be bothered to read it. And I think that's the damage. So if I look at those two things around what we saw, about a year ago, in terms of people saying, if I think AI has written this, I'm not going to think that's as helpful. And then looking at, and if AI has written it, I'm not going to read it. That would suggest that there's work to do, that if you're using it to draft, make sure you're taking the time to edit and that it sounds human, because already we can tell when something is AI written. Completely. And it's easy to feel. So I think you can use it to draft, use it to help. But if you're trying to build trust or rebuild trust, don't use it. And that's my, quite black and white advice there.
Yeah, easy to feel is the thing that I picked up from that. And that's where we kind of come with AI generated video at the moment. It's like, where are the hairs on the back of your neck where you're like, well, I really connected with you. I'm still to feel that completely from AI. And it may come at some point, but I still haven't. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And we've had Phil Agnew from the Nudge podcast was talking about that with art as well. AI generated art. People loved it. And then as soon as they found out it was produced by AI, they really didn't like it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I guess in terms of trusting an organization or a leadership team, the only thing they can do is hide the fact it's AI to be more trusted. But then that's
not ethical then, is it?
No, it's not ethical and not very trustworthy. So
don't do that. But I think in the art comparison is interesting, because what that kind of signals from a human perspective is that we don't connect to just the output. We're connecting to the person behind it, the process, the work that's gone into it. So if I love this piece of art and then I find out that it's AI and I switch off, that's because my connection to that is the person that's done it, the inspiration behind it, the more complex stuff that's built it. If we think we're just connected because of the task or the output, then that's fine. But that's not the case at work. It's not the case with leadership. It's, we want to connect to the person that's sending that. And I think that's maybe that's part of the distinction of when to use it and when not, is whether you need people to connect, feel something, evoke some emotion. If you don't care about that and you don't need that, then using robots to do stuff is fine. But I would say 95% of work requires some emotion and connection and relationship. So
yeah, and it ties back to what you were saying about the leader's vision and people wanting to feel connected to that and the passion. And it'd be interesting to see what happens with Zuckerberg's AI avatar, where people can interact with him there. Because, when I think about like our own organization, Nick, our founder, like I know people really want to have some time with him and speak to him and have that, because then you start to kind of feel closer to that vision and that passion. It's really important to build that in if you can. Yeah.
I think it will have a place. I think it comes down to your culture a bit. I said, if you're looking to rebuild or build trust, then don't use it. And I think that's the key thing. If you feel like you've got bucket loads of trust and it's absolutely fine and you're going to be open about using it and all those things, then fine. If you've got a trust problem, then I would think twice.
Yes. Yeah. One thing I wanted to wrap up on, it's been great to have you on, and I think I've covered lots of the things I wanted to talk about, but we always wrap up with one question, which is our audience of one question. When you're writing your book, when you're creating content, there's this idea that you should have a person in mind when you're creating, a single person, so you can connect, on that level. Who's that person that you have in your mind when you're creating content, and how does that change your work?
Oh, that's really hard because I have about 3 different people that come into my mind with different bits of content. Because I talk to internal comms people, HR people, and leaders. I would say the majority of the time, the person in my mind is a frustrated and challenged CEO or COO who is really trying to get people to do what they want them to do, and they are not doing it, and they are frustrated, but have such a huge want for things to be better. And they are the people that are in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's core, isn't it? To have the want, the desire to change.
Yes.
Because if you don't have that, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Jenni. We'd love to have you on again in the future. But yeah, for now, it's been a great conversation. And yeah, thank you for coming on.
It's been great. Thank you for having me.
If this episode sparked something, curiosity, a new way of thinking, or something you're going to take back to the team, we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Make sure you're subscribed, leave us a rating, and drop us a comment. Tell us what's stuck and what you want us to explore next. We want to know.
This is The Audience Connection, sponsored by Casual, the video partner for global brands trying to build trust with their audiences. We'll see you next time.